There is something about Keanu Reeves that feels different from every other celebrity in Hollywood. He does not chase the spotlight. He does not demand attention. He simply exists in this world with a quiet grace that makes you believe good people still walk among us. I first noticed this years ago when I read a story about him giving up his seat on a subway to a tired stranger. No cameras, no interviews, just a simple act of kindness that someone happened to witness. Since then, I have collected stories about this man like precious stones. The time he took a massive pay cut so the special effects team on The Matrix could be paid fairly. The time he secretly funded children's hospitals for years without ever putting his name on a single donation. The time he sat alone on a bench eating a sandwich, looking so beautifully human that the internet created a meme about him being sad, when really he was just being himself. But what inspires me most about Keanu Reeves is not his generosity or his humility. It is his resilience. This is a man who lost his best friend to an overdose, who lost his child and then his girlfriend in the span of 2 years, who has faced more grief than most of us could survive, and yet he continues to show up in this world with kindness in his heart and warmth in his eyes. Keanu once said something that has stayed with me ever since I heard it. He said, "Grief changes shape, but it never ends." And I think that is why he moves through life the way he does. He understands that pain is not something you defeat. It is something you carry, and if you are lucky, you find people who help you carry it. This story is about one of those people, and it is about a secret that two friends have kept for 30 years. A secret that proves sometimes the smallest, silliest gestures can save a human soul. The air inside the prop bus felt different that night. It was not cold exactly, but there was a stillness that seemed to settle into everything, into the torn leather seats, into the dust floating through the dim emergency lights, into the space between two people who had not yet learned how to be friends. Sandra Bullock sat near the back, her script resting unopened on her lap, her eyes focused on nothing in particular. She could hear the distant sound of crew members packing up equipment outside, their voices fading like echoes from another world. Something felt heavy in that moment, though she could not name it. Perhaps it was exhaustion. Perhaps it was the weight of pretending to be brave for 12 hours straight while cameras captured every manufactured emotion. Or perhaps it was the quiet recognition that the man sitting 3 rows ahead of her was carrying something invisible, something that made the silence around him feel like mourning. Keanu Reeves had not moved in almost 20 minutes. His head was tilted slightly toward the window, though there was nothing to see outside except the black canvas of a soundstage wall. His hands rested on his knees, fingers occasionally twitching as if reaching for something that was no longer there. Sandra had noticed this about him during the past 6 weeks of filming Speed. He was present and absent at the same time. He hit every mark, delivered every line, performed every stunt with total commitment. But when the director yelled cut, something in his eyes would drift away to a place none of them could follow. She did not know the details yet. None of them did. They did not know about River Phoenix, Keanu's closest friend, who had collapsed and died outside a nightclub just months before filming began. They did not know that Keanu had rushed to the hospital that night, that he had held his friend's hand while doctors delivered news that would shatter any human heart. They only knew that their leading man sometimes disappeared into himself, and that nobody quite knew how to reach him. The bus creaked slightly as Sandra stood up. She was not sure what she was doing or why she was doing it. Her body simply moved before her mind could talk her out of it. She walked slowly down the aisle, her footsteps soft against the rubber flooring, until she reached the row where Keanu sat alone with his grief. She did not ask if she could sit down. She simply slid into the seat across from him and let the silence continue for a while longer. Outside, the last crew member's voice faded into nothing. The soundstage fell completely quiet, and in that manufactured bus that was built to explode on camera, 2 strangers began the slow process of becoming something more. Keanu finally turned his head toward her. His eyes were not wet, but there was a redness around them that spoke of tears held back for too long. He opened his mouth as if to say something polite, something dismissive, something that would allow him to retreat back into his protective shell. But Sandra spoke first. "I do not know what you are carrying," she said softly, "and I am not going to ask you to tell me. But I want you to know that whatever it is, you do not have to carry it alone right now. Not in this bus. Not at 3 in the morning. Not with me sitting right here." Keanu stared at her for a long moment. His expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, resistance, vulnerability, and finally something that looked almost like gratitude. He did not respond with words. He simply nodded once, a small movement that carried more meaning than any speech could have conveyed. They sat in silence for another few minutes. Sandra noticed that his hands had stopped twitching. His shoulders had lowered slightly from their tense position near his ears. He was still hurting, that much was obvious, but something in the quality of his pain had shifted. It was no longer solitary, it was shared. And then, without any planning or forethought, Sandra did something ridiculous. She reached across the space between them and wiggled her fingers in the strangest little wave, then made a fist and bumped it gently against his arm, then pointed at him like a child playing pretend guns. The whole sequence took maybe 3 seconds and looked absolutely absurd. Keanu blinked at her in confusion. "What was that?" he asked, and for the first time in weeks, there was a hint of lightness in his voice, a crack in the armor that let something warm shine through. Sandra shrugged with exaggerated seriousness. "I have absolutely no idea," she said, "but I think it is ours now." For a moment, nothing happened. Then Keanu's lips twitched, then his shoulders shook slightly. Then, like sunrise breaking through storm clouds, he laughed. It was not a polite laugh or a forced laugh. It was real and full and surprised, as if his body had remembered how to feel joy and was shocked by the rediscovery. Sandra found herself laughing too, not because anything was particularly funny, but because laughter shared between two people creates a bridge that words cannot build. In that moment, in that fake bus, in the darkness of an empty soundstage, something important was born. A friendship that would last 3 decades. A ritual that would become legend. A secret that the world would spend years trying to uncover. Neither of them knew it yet, but that silly little gesture would save both of their lives in the years to come. It would be there when Keanu's world collapsed again and again. It would be there when Sandra faced her own impossible challenges. It would evolve and grow and deepen until it became a language that only 2 people on Earth could speak. But all of that was still in the future. For now, there was only this moment. 2 tired actors, 1 broken bus, and a ridiculous handshake that meant nothing and everything at the same time. Keanu wiped his eyes, still chuckling softly. "You are very strange, Sandra Bullock," he said, and the way he said it made it sound like the highest compliment he knew how to give. Sandra grinned at him. "Thank you," she replied. "I have been practicing my whole life." Outside the bus, somewhere in the vast darkness of the soundstage, a shadow moved. A young production assistant who had returned to grab a forgotten bag paused near the prop vehicle, hearing the unexpected sound of laughter. Curious, they pulled out a small notebook, the kind journalists used to capture details, and wrote a quick note about what they had witnessed. 2 stars, laughing, some kind of hand gesture. Strange. The production assistant pocketed the notebook and walked away, thinking nothing more of it. They could not have known that this small observation would be the first thread in a mystery that would captivate millions. They could not have known that they had just witnessed the birth of something sacred. And they certainly could not have known that 25 years later, that very notebook would resurface and threaten to destroy the beautiful secret that Keanu and Sandra had protected all along. But that night, none of that mattered. That night, there was only healing, only connection, only the first tentative steps of a friendship that would prove to the world that Hollywood, for all its darkness, could still produce something pure. Keanu looked at Sandra with new eyes, seeing her perhaps for the first time. So he said slowly, "Same time tomorrow night." Sandra nodded. "Same bus," she agreed. "And maybe we can add to our secret handshake, make it even more ridiculous." Keanu smiled, and this time the smile reached his eyes completely. "I would like that," he said. "I would like that very much." The emergency lights flickered once, then steadied. Somewhere outside, a security guard began his nightly rounds. And in the quiet of that fake bus, 2 real people made a silent promise to look after each other, no matter what the future would bring. The morning light felt different somehow. It carried a softness that seemed almost hesitant, as if the sun itself was unsure whether to fully commit to the day ahead. Sandra stood by her kitchen window in her small Lowe's Angels apartment, watching the way shadows moved slowly across her neighbor's garden wall. Steam rose from the coffee cup in her hands, curling and disappearing into the quiet air. There was something stirring inside her chest, a feeling she could not quite name, something between anticipation and the gentle ache of memory. She had not spoken to Keanu in almost 3 weeks, not because of any disagreement or distance between them, but simply because life had pulled them in different directions. He was filming somewhere in Europe. She was preparing for a new romantic comedy that would demand every ounce of her energy. But this morning, For reasons she could not explain, she found herself thinking about that bus, about that night, about the ridiculous little gesture that had somehow become the most meaningful ritual of her life. Her phone buzzed softly against the marble countertop. She glanced at the screen and felt her heart lift immediately. It was a text message containing only 2 words. Bus time. Sandra smiled and typed back a single word. Always. Somewhere across the ocean, she knew Keanu was smiling too, and somehow that knowledge made the morning light feel warmer, more certain, more willing to fully arrive. The years that followed their first meeting moved like water through open fingers. 1995 arrived with new projects and new challenges. 1996 brought award shows and red carpets where they would sometimes cross paths, always greeting each other with that knowing look, that slight movement of fingers that nobody else understood. The handshake evolved during these years, growing more complex with each significant moment they shared. In 1997, Sandra received devastating news. Her father, who had always been her biggest supporter, was diagnosed with a serious illness. She called Keanu at 2 in the morning, sobbing so hard she could barely form words. He listened without interrupting, without offering empty platitudes, without trying to fix what could not be fixed. When she finally fell silent, exhausted from grief, he simply said, "I am catching the first flight out. I will be there by morning." True to his word, he arrived at her doorstep 8 hours later, still wearing the clothes he had been sleeping in when she called. They sat together on her couch for the entire day, sometimes talking, sometimes silent, sometimes crying together. And before he left that evening, they added a new element to their handshake. A thumb cross pressed together for 3 full seconds, symbolizing the way grief intertwines 2 souls who choose to carry it together. But the world was beginning to notice. Entertainment journalists, always hungry for stories that sparkled with mystery, started observing patterns. At a charity gala in 1998, a photographer captured a blurry image of Sandra and Keanu in a corner, their hands moving in an unusual sequence before they embraced. The photo made its way into a small tabloid column with the headline, "What are they hiding?" Nobody took it seriously at the time. It was just another piece of Hollywood gossip, quickly forgotten beneath the weight of larger scandals. Then came the year 2000, and with it, a tragedy that would test the boundaries of human endurance. Keanu's girlfriend Jennifer gave birth to their daughter, a beautiful baby girl named Ava. But Ava was stillborn, and the grief that followed was unlike anything Keanu had ever experienced. It was not the sharp pain of sudden loss that he had felt when River died. It was something deeper, something that settled into his bones and refused to leave. It was the grief of imagining a future that would never exist, of holding a child who would never open her eyes, of becoming a father and losing that identity in the same devastating moment. Sandra flew to him immediately. She did not ask permission or wait for an invitation. She simply showed up at his door and refused to leave. For 2 weeks, she stayed in his guest room, cooking meals he barely touched, sitting beside him during the long nights when sleep refused to come, holding his hand during the moments when the pain became too much to bear alone. On the 14th day, Keanu finally spoke more than a few words at a time. He told her about the nursery he had painted, about the tiny clothes he had purchased, about the dreams he had allowed himself to dream. And when he finished, when the words had finally run dry, Sandra reached for his hand and performed their secret handshake slowly and deliberately. But this time, she added something new. A double tap on his wrist, right over the pulse point, right over the place where life itself could be felt flowing through veins. It meant, "I am checking that you are still here. I am reminding you that your heart is still beating. I am telling you that survival is enough for today." Keanu looked at the gesture, then looked at her, and something in his eyes shifted. It was not happiness, it was far too soon for that, but it was recognition. Recognition that he was not alone. Recognition that someone had chosen to walk through this darkness beside him. Recognition that the silly little handshake they had invented on a fake bus had become something sacred, something that could hold weight that words could never carry. The whispers grew louder as the years continued to pass. 2005 brought a viral moment at a film premiere when a fan with a camera phone captured Sandra and Keanu doing something strange with their hands before walking the red carpet together. The video was grainy and brief, barely 3 seconds of footage that showed nothing definitive, but it was enough to spark curiosity. Message boards lit up with speculation. Fan websites dedicated entire pages to analyzing the footage frame by frame. Theories multiplied like wildfire in dry grass. Some believed it was a romantic ritual, proof that the 2 actors had been secretly in love for years. Others thought it was a professional superstition, a good luck charm performed before public appearances. A few creative souls suggested it was a secret society signal, evidence that Hollywood celebrities belonged to mysterious organizations that controlled the entertainment industry. The truth, of course, was far simpler and far more beautiful than any of these theories. But the truth was also private, and both Keanu and Sandra intended to keep it that way. Journalists began asking questions during interviews. At first, the questions were subtle, almost playful. "We noticed you and Sandra have a special greeting," an interviewer said to Keanu in 2008. "Care to share what that is about?" Keanu smiled his gentle smile and tilted his head slightly. "Sandra and I have been friends for a long time," he replied. "Friends develop their own languages, that is all it is." The answer satisfied no one, which was precisely his intention. Sandra faced similar questions and handled them with equal grace. During a press tour in 2010, a persistent reporter pushed harder than most. "There are rumors about a secret handshake," the reporter said, leaning forward with hungry eyes. "Some people say it has deep meaning. Some people say it is proof of something more between you two." Sandra laughed warmly, neither confirming nor denying. "Keanu and I have lots of secrets," she said. "That is what happens when you have been friends for almost 20 years. But I will tell you this. Whatever we share, it is ours, and some things are worth protecting." The reporter tried to follow up, but Sandra smoothly redirected the conversation to her upcoming film. Later that evening, she texted Keanu about the encounter. "They want our handshake," she wrote. His response came quickly. "They can want it forever. Some things are not for sale." But the pressure continued to build. Social media exploded in the 2010s, and with it came an insatiable appetite for celebrity secrets. Every public appearance became an opportunity for analysis. Every photograph was examined for hidden meanings. Fan accounts dedicated to the Keanu-Sandra handshake mystery accumulated hundreds of thousands of followers. Compilation videos on early YouTube gathered millions of views, showing every instance where the two actors had been spotted making unusual hand gestures in each other's presence. In 2015, a tweet went viral that would change everything. Posted by an attendee at a charity event, it read simply, "Did anyone else see Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock do that thing with their hands before the auction started? I swear it looked like some kind of ritual." The tweet received over 50,000 retweets in 48 hours. News outlets picked up the story. Suddenly, the secret handshake was no longer a niche curiosity for dedicated fans. It was mainstream news. Entertainment Tonight ran a segment on celebrity secrets, featuring the Keanu-Sandra mystery prominently. Access Hollywood devoted 5 minutes to analyzing available footage. Even serious publications like Vanity Fair published think pieces about the cultural fascination with celebrity privacy and the boundaries between public personas and personal relationships. The handshake had become bigger than either of them could have imagined. Keanu called Sandra the night the Vanity Fair piece was published. "I am worried," he admitted, his voice carrying an unusual edge of anxiety. "What we have, it matters to me more than almost anything, and now everyone wants a piece of it." Sandra understood exactly what he meant. The handshake was not just a greeting. It was a language they had built together over 2 decades. It was a container for every tear they had shared, every laugh they had enjoyed, every moment of connection that had sustained them through the darkest chapters of their lives. The thought of that sacred thing becoming public entertainment made her stomach turn. "We protect it," she said firmly. "No matter what. We protect it like we have always protected each other." Keanu was silent for a long moment. Then he performed their handshake through the phone, describing each movement, and she mirrored it on her end, both of them laughing at the absurdity and crying at the beauty of what they had created. But somewhere in Hollywood, in a small office cluttered with old notebooks and faded photographs, someone was making plans. Someone who had been waiting for the right moment to cash in on a secret they had stumbled upon 20 years earlier. Someone who had kept that original notebook from the speed set, waiting for the day when the world would be ready to pay a fortune for what it contained. The shadow from that long-ago night was about to step into the light, and when it did, everything Keanu and Sandra had built would face its greatest test. The call came on a Tuesday morning in 2018. Sandra was drinking coffee in her kitchen, watching the morning light move across her garden when her publicist's name appeared on her phone screen. The publicist's voice was urgent, almost panicked. "Someone is shopping a story," she said. "They claim to have footage from the speed set, original footage from 1994. They say it shows the first secret handshake." Sandra felt her blood turn cold. "That is not possible," she whispered, but even as she spoke the words, a memory surfaced unbidden. A shadow near the bus that night. A sound of footsteps that she had dismissed as imagination. The distant figure of someone moving away in the darkness. "They are asking for $1 million," her publicist continued. "And they say if no outlet pays, they will release it for free on the internet." Sandra's hands began to tremble. She thought about Keanu, about everything they had survived together, about the sacred ritual that had saved both of their souls more times than she could count. "I need to call Keanu," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to call him right now." The silence on the other end of the phone felt heavier than any words could have been. Sandra stood in her living room, her heart pounding against her ribs, waiting for Keanu to say something, anything that might make this nightmare feel less real. Outside her window, the Los Angeles sky was a perfect cloudless blue, the kind of day that usually filled her with gratitude and peace. But today, the beauty felt like mockery. Today, everything felt fragile and exposed. Keanu finally spoke, and his voice carried a weariness that made Sandra's chest ache. "How much do they have?" he asked quietly. She could hear him breathing slowly, deliberately, the way he always did when he was trying to control emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. She pictured him sitting somewhere alone, perhaps in his modest home that never matched his fame, perhaps on one of those motorcycle rides he took when the world became too loud. Wherever he was, she wished desperately that she could be there beside him. "They claim to have video from the first night," she replied, her own voice trembling despite her efforts to stay calm. "From the bus. They say it shows everything, Keanu. They say it shows the moment we created our handshake." The words hung in the air between them, stretching across the miles that separated their physical bodies but could never separate their souls. Keanu was quiet for another long moment. When he spoke again, there was something new in his voice. Not anger exactly, but a deep and profound sadness. "You know what that night meant to me," he said softly. "You know what you did for me in that bus. You know that our handshake is the only reason I survived the years that followed." Sandra felt tears sliding down her cheeks, warm and unstoppable. She did know. She knew better than anyone. The person behind the threat was not a stranger. Their name was Michael Chen, and 24 years earlier they had been a young production assistant on the set of Speed. Eager and ambitious, Michael had dreamed of becoming a filmmaker, of telling stories that would move audiences around the world. But Hollywood had other plans. Doors closed, opportunities vanished, dreams slowly crumbled into dust. And somewhere along the way, Michael had become bitter, convinced that the industry owed them something it had never delivered. The notebook had sat in a box for over 2 decades. Michael had almost forgotten about it, buried as it was beneath old scripts and faded headshots and rejection letters that still stung when accidentally touched. But then the internet happened. Social media happened. The viral fascination with Keanu and Sandra's secret handshake happened. And suddenly that forgotten notebook became valuable. That blurry memory of shadows in a bus became currency. Michael had done their research carefully. They had tracked down the original footage from that night, a security camera that nobody remembered existed, one that had captured just enough of the bus interior to show 2 figures moving their hands in an unusual pattern. The footage was grainy and incomplete. It showed the beginning of the handshake, but not the end. It captured the moment, but not the meaning. Still, it was enough to sell, enough to destroy something beautiful for profit. The tabloid meeting was scheduled for Friday. Michael had already received preliminary offers from 3 different outlets, each one higher than the last. The current bid stood at $1.2 million for exclusive rights to the footage and the accompanying story. $1.2 million to expose a private moment between 2 people who had never done anything except care for each other. Michael told themselves it was just business. Celebrities knew what they signed up for. Privacy was a luxury that fame did not allow. These were the lies that made the betrayal feel acceptable. These were the stories that helped Michael sleep at night. Keanu flew to Los Angeles the same day Sandra called him. They met at her home, sitting together on the same couch where he had comforted her during her father's illness, where she had held him during his darkest chapters, where countless conversations had woven their souls together over the span of decades. The afternoon light filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the floor. Neither of them spoke for a long time. They simply sat, their shoulders touching, drawing strength from proximity. Finally, Sandra broke the silence. "We could pay them," she said, though the words tasted bitter in her mouth. "We could make this go away." Keanu shook his head slowly. "That is not who we are," he replied. "We do not reward people for cruelty. We do not pay for the privilege of keeping our own memories." Sandra knew he was right, but the alternative felt equally impossible. The thought of their sacred ritual becoming content, becoming clickbait, becoming something for strangers to analyze and mock and diminish, made her want to scream. "Then what do we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw something that surprised her. It was not defeat. It was not fear. It was a strange and quiet acceptance, the kind that comes only from surviving losses that should have been unsurvivable. "They can take the gesture," he said softly. "They can record it and sell it and broadcast it to the whole world. But they cannot take what it means. They cannot take the nights you saved me. They cannot take the years we built together. They cannot take the truth that lives inside both of us." Sandra stared at him, feeling tears threatening again. "How can you be so calm?" she asked. "How can you be so at peace with this?" Keanu smiled gently, that famous smile that had comforted millions who had never even met him. "Because I learned something a long time ago," he said. "Grief changes shape, but it never ends. And the same is true for love, Sandra. The same is true for friendship. What we have cannot be destroyed by exposure. It can only be transformed." The story broke on Wednesday, 2 days before the scheduled tabloid meeting. Someone at one of the outlets had leaked information about the upcoming sale, and suddenly every entertainment reporter in the country was chasing the same story. Keanu and Sandra's secret handshake exposed. Footage from 1994 reveals Hollywood's best-kept secret. The headlines multiplied like viruses, each one more sensational than the last. Sandra's phone rang constantly. Keanu's publicist issued a statement asking for privacy that everyone ignored. Paparazzi gathered outside both of their homes, cameras flashing, voices shouting questions that neither of them intended to answer. The circus had arrived, and it showed no signs of leaving. But something unexpected began to happen. As the story spread, as more people learned about the impending exposure, a counter-narrative emerged. Fans who had spent years fascinated by the handshake mystery started speaking out against the betrayal. Social media filled with messages of support. Celebrities who had their own private rituals and sacred friendships expressed solidarity. A hashtag began trending: "Protect their privacy." It spread across platforms, gathering momentum like a wave building toward shore. Michael Chen watched all of this from their small apartment, scrolling through endless comments on their phone. They had expected excitement. They had expected gratitude from a public hungry for secrets. Instead, they found condemnation. Instead, they found thousands of strangers calling them names, questioning their morality, asking how anyone could sell something so personal for money. At first, Michael dismissed the criticism. People always complained. People always took the moral high ground until they were the ones with something valuable to sell. But then, late on Wednesday night, something shifted. Michael stumbled upon an old interview with Keanu Reeves, one from years earlier, one they had never seen before. In the interview, Keanu spoke about grief. He spoke about losing his best friend River to an overdose. He spoke about losing his daughter Ava before she ever took a breath. He spoke about the darkness that had threatened to consume him, about the moments when continuing to exist felt like an impossible task. And then, with tears in his eyes, he said something that hit Michael like a physical blow. "The only thing that saved me was the people who showed up. The people who sat with me in the darkness without trying to fix anything. The people who invented silly little rituals just to make me laugh. Those people are the reason I am still here." Michael stared at the screen, hands trembling. Silly little rituals. The words echoed in their mind. They thought about that night on the speed set, about the laughter they had heard coming from the bus, about the way it had sounded so pure and unexpected in the emptiness of the soundstage. They thought about what might have been happening inside that bus. Not a scandal, not a secret romance, just two people helping each other survive. Thursday morning arrived gray and heavy. Michael had not slept. They had spent the entire night reading articles about Keanu's losses, about Sandra's quiet philanthropy, about the friendship that had endured for 24 years without either of them ever exploiting it for publicity. They had watched old interviews where Keanu spoke about kindness as the highest form of human achievement. They had read about Sandra's work with foster children, about the way she had built schools in communities that nobody else cared about. And somewhere in those hours of reading, something inside Michael began to break. The tabloid meeting was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. The contracts were ready. The money was waiting. All Michael had to do was show up and sign their name. But as the morning light grew stronger, as the reality of what they were about to do became clearer, Michael found themselves unable to move. They thought about their own life, the disappointments, the rejections, the bitterness that had accumulated like dust over decades. They thought about the person they had wanted to become when they first arrived in Hollywood, full of dreams and idealism and belief in the power of stories. That person would have been disgusted by what Michael was about to do. That person would have protected the secret, not sold it. Michael picked up their phone and dialed the tabloid editor. The conversation was brief. "I am not coming," Michael said, their voice steady despite the fear coursing through their veins. "The deal is off." The editor sputtered in disbelief, threatening legal action, promising consequences. But Michael had already hung up. They walked to their desk, opened the drawer where the notebook had been stored, and pulled it out along with the USB drive containing the footage. For a long moment, they simply stared at these objects. 24 years of waiting, $1.2 million walking away, a lifetime of bitterness asking to be fed. And yet, holding these things in their hands, Michael felt nothing but emptiness. This was not justice. This was not revenge. This was just cruelty disguised as ambition. Michael walked to the fireplace, struck a match, and watched as the notebook began to burn. Page by page, the evidence disappeared into ash and smoke. The USB drive followed, melting and warping in the heat until it was nothing but unrecognizable plastic. And when it was done, when 24 years of secrets had been reduced to dust, Michael sat down on the floor and cried. They cried for the career they never had. They cried for the dreams that had died so long ago. They cried for the bitterness that had poisoned so many years. But mostly, they cried because somewhere inside them, the person they had wanted to become was still alive. Damaged and hidden, but alive. That evening, Michael wrote a letter. They did not send it directly to Keanu or Sandra, knowing it would never reach them through the walls of publicists and assistants. Instead, they found a trusted entertainment journalist who had written kindly about both actors over the years. The letter was brief but honest. To Keanu and Sandra it began, "You do not know me, but I almost destroyed something precious that belonged to you. I had footage from 1994. I had proof of the moment your friendship began, and I almost sold it to the highest bidder. But last night I watched an old interview where Keanu talked about the people who saved him with silly little rituals. And I realized that I was about to destroy something sacred for money. I could not do it. The footage is gone. The notebook is gone. Your secret is safe. I do not expect forgiveness. I am not even sure I deserve it. But I wanted you to know that some things are too sacred to sell. Your friendship reminded me of that. And maybe that is the most valuable thing I could have gained from any of this. I am sorry for almost betraying you. And I am grateful for the reminder that kindness matters more than currency." The letter was unsigned, but somehow, through channels that neither Keanu nor Sandra ever fully understood, it reached them both. They read it together, sitting on Sandra's couch, tears streaming down their faces. And when they finished, they performed their secret handshake slowly and deliberately, adding one final element that would remain theirs forever. A hand placed over the heart. A silent acknowledgement that some battles are won not through fighting, but through the simple endurance of love. The autumn air carried a crispness that felt like change. Sandra stood backstage at the Kodak Theater, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the simple black dress she had chosen for the evening. Around her, the familiar chaos of a major award show swirled and hummed, assistants rushing past with clipboards, celebrities greeting each other with practiced smiles, cameras flashing in the distance like summer lightning. But Sandra noticed none of it. Her mind was somewhere else entirely, drifting through 30 years of memories that had led to this single moment. She could feel Keanu's presence before she saw him. It was always this way between them, a quiet awareness that transcended physical proximity. She turned and found him walking toward her through the crowded backstage area, dressed in a simple dark suit that somehow made him look both elegant and approachable. His hair was longer now, streaked with gray that he had never bothered to hide. His face carried the lines of 6 decades lived fully and painfully and beautifully. But his eyes were exactly the same as they had been on that bus 30 years ago, warm and deep and carrying secrets that only she understood. They stood facing each other for a long moment, not speaking, not needing to speak. Around them, the world continued its frantic spinning, but in their small bubble of shared history, time itself seemed to pause. Sandra felt tears threatening and blinked them back. Not yet, she told herself. Save them for when they matter. Keanu reached out and took her hand gently. "You ready for this?" he asked, his voice soft enough that only she could hear. Sandra squeezed his fingers and nodded. "I have been ready for 30 years, she replied. "I just did not know it until now." The decision to finally share their story had not come easily. In the weeks following Michael Chen's unexpected act of mercy, Keanu and Sandra had spent countless hours discussing what to do next. The world still wanted their secret. The fascination had not diminished. If anything, the failed exposure had only intensified public curiosity. Everyone wanted to know what was so precious that someone had chosen to destroy it rather than sell it. They could have remained silent forever. They could have carried their handshake to their graves, letting it exist only in whispered rumors and blurry photographs. But something had shifted inside both of them. The near betrayal had reminded them how fragile sacred things could be. It had also reminded them how hungry the world was for stories of genuine connection in an age of manufactured relationships and performative friendships. What if we share it on our own terms, Sandra had suggested one evening, sitting with Keanu on her back porch as the sun set over the hills. What if we tell people what it means, not so they can copy it, but so they can understand why it matters? Keanu had considered this for a long time, watching the sky turn from gold to purple to deep blue. And then he had nodded slowly. Maybe that is the point, he said. Maybe we have been protecting it for ourselves when we should have been sharing the lesson it taught us. The invitation to present at the Lifetime Achievement in Friendship Awards ceremony had arrived 2 weeks later, as if the universe itself had been listening to their conversation. Keanu and Sandra had looked at each other and known immediately that this was the moment. This was when their private ritual would become a gift to the world. The theater fell silent as they walked onto the stage together. 2,000 faces turned toward them, famous and unknown alike, all holding their breath in anticipation. Cameras from around the world broadcast their images to millions of screens in hundreds of countries. But Keanu and Sandra saw none of this. They saw only each other and the invisible thread of 30 years that bound them together. Sandra stepped toward the microphone first, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her chest. 30 years ago, she began on a bus that was designed to explode. I met a man who was quietly carrying more pain than anyone knew. He had just lost his best friend. He was showing up to work every day and hitting every mark and delivering every line, and nobody realized that inside he was barely surviving. She paused, letting the words settle over the audience. And I was carrying my own invisible weight. I was a young actress who was not sure she belonged in this industry. I was pretending to be brave while secretly wondering if anyone would ever see the real me. Keanu stepped closer to the microphone, his shoulder brushing against Sandra's in that familiar way that had comforted them both through decades of challenges. We did not become friends that night, he said softly. We became something more complicated than that. We became witnesses to each other's pain. We became the people who showed up when showing up was the only thing that mattered. He looked at Sandra, and in his eyes she saw every tear they had shared, every laugh that had saved them, every moment of connection that had made survival possible. Sandra continued, her voice growing stronger. Everyone wants to know about our secret handshake. They want to see it. They want to understand it. They want to copy it and make it their own. And for 30 years we have protected it because it felt too sacred to share. She took a deep breath. But tonight we realized something. We have been protecting the wrong thing. The audience leaned forward collectively, confusion and curiosity mingling on their faces. Keanu smiled gently. The handshake itself is not what matters, he explained. The movements are silly. They are random. They started as a joke to make a grieving man laugh. What matters is what those movements represent. What matters is the decision to show up for another person, even when you do not know how to help. What matters is the courage to be ridiculous in the presence of pain. Sandra turned to face Keanu directly, and the audience seemed to hold its breath. "Shall we?" she asked, and her voice carried a tenderness that made several people in the front rows wipe their eyes. Keanu nodded, and slowly, deliberately, they began to perform their secret handshake for the first time in public. First came the finger wiggle, playful and absurd, the original gesture that had broken through Keanu's grief on that long-ago night. "This means life is absurd," Sandra explained as they performed it. "It means that sometimes the only response to pain is silliness. It means giving yourself permission to be foolish when the world expects you to be strong." Next came the fist bump, gentle but firm, connecting them through the simple pressure of knuckle against knuckle. "This means we are strong," Keanu said, "not because we never break, but because we break together. It means admitting that strength is not about standing alone. It is about knowing when to lean on someone else." Then their thumbs interlocked, pressing together in a cross pattern that they held for 3 full seconds. "This was added when Keanu lost his daughter," Sandra said, her voice wavering slightly. "It means we carry each other's grief. It means that when one of us is drowning, the other will dive in without hesitation. Several people in the audience were openly crying now, tissues pressed to their faces. The double tap on the wrist came next, two soft touches right over the pulse point. This means I am checking that you are still here, Keanu explained. I am reminding you that your heart is still beating. I am telling you that survival is enough for today. It means asking the questions that people are afraid to ask. Are you okay? Are you safe? Are you still fighting? Then both of them placed their hands over their own hearts, holding the position for a moment of reverent silence. This means you live here, Sandra said. It means that even when we are apart, even when months pass without contact, we carry each other inside us. It means that true friendship transcends distance and time and circumstance. Finally, they pointed at each other, fingers extended like children playing a game, smiles breaking across both their faces. And this means you are the gift, Keanu concluded. It means that in a world full of uncertainty and pain and loss, the greatest treasure is the people who choose to love us. It means gratitude. It means recognition. It means you matter to me more than you will ever understand. The audience erupted in applause, but Keanu raised his hand gently, asking for a moment more of their attention. The theater fell silent again. We are not showing you this so you can copy our handshake, he said. We are showing you this so you will create your own. Sandra nodded, stepping closer to the microphone. Somewhere out there, she said, looking directly into the camera that would carry her words to millions of screens, there is someone who needs you to show up. There is someone carrying invisible weight, pretending to be okay, wondering if anyone sees them. And you have the power to change their life with something as simple as a silly gesture. Keanu continued, his voice carrying the weight of everything he had survived. You do not need to fix people. You do not need to have the right words. You do not need to solve their problems. You just need to be there. You just need to let them know they are not alone. You just need to be willing to look ridiculous if it means making someone smile. Sandra felt tears sliding down her cheeks and did not bother to wipe them away. Find your person, she said. Create your ritual. Protect it with everything you have. And when the world tries to cheapen it or expose it or turn it into content, remember what it truly represents. Remember that the most powerful language is not spoken. It is shared. It is held. It is passed between two souls who have chosen to witness each other. The months that followed the ceremony brought changes that neither Keanu nor Sandra had anticipated. Their decision to share the meaning behind their handshake sparked something unexpected across the world. A movement began, quiet at first, then growing in strength and volume as people everywhere started creating and sharing their own sacred rituals. A father in Ohio posted a video of the special handshake he had developed with his daughter before every chemotherapy treatment. A pair of soldiers revealed the gesture they performed before every deployment, a private promise to bring each other home. A teacher shared the fist bump sequence she used with a struggling student, a daily reminder that someone believed in him. Elderly best friends demonstrated the handhold they had been doing for 60 years, a ritual that had survived marriages and losses and decades of change. The hashtag spread across every platform, Handshake. Millions of people shared their stories, their rituals, their sacred gestures, and with each share the message multiplied. Connection matters, showing up matters. The silly little things we do for each other can save lives. Keanu and Sandra watched this ripple effect with wonder and gratitude. They had spent 30 years protecting something they thought was only theirs. But in sharing it, they had discovered that it had never been only theirs at all. It had always belonged to everyone who had ever loved someone enough to look foolish for them. It had always been a universal truth, waiting for two people brave enough to speak it aloud. On a quiet morning 1 year after the ceremony, Keanu and Sandra met for coffee at a small cafe in Los Angeles. No cameras followed them. No reporters waited outside. They were simply two old friends, sitting across from each other, watching the morning light move slowly across the table between them. Sandra noticed a father and daughter at the next table. The little girl was perhaps 7 years old, her hair in messy pigtails, her face serious with concentration. The father leaned toward her and performed a little ritual, a wave, a fist bump, and a point, before handing her a backpack for school. The little girl giggled and repeated the gesture perfectly, then wrapped her arms around her father's neck in a fierce hug. Sandra nudged Keanu and tilted her head toward the pair. He watched for a moment, a soft smile spreading across his face. "Think we made a difference?" Sandra asked quietly. Keanu was silent for a long moment, watching the father walk his daughter to the door, their hands clasped together, their connection visible in every step. "Yeah," he finally said, turning back to Sandra with eyes that glistened slightly. "I think we did." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, two people who had survived 30 years together, who had created something precious from nothing, who had learned that the greatest gifts are often the smallest gestures. Then, under the table where no one could see, they performed their secret handshake one more time. Finger wiggle, fist bump, thumb cross, double tap, hands to hearts point at each other. And in that simple sequence, 30 years of love and loss and laughter lived on. This story at its heart is about the power of small things. We live in a world that celebrates grand gestures, that rewards dramatic declarations, that measures love in expensive gifts and public displays. But Keanu and Sandra's friendship reminds us that the most meaningful connections are often built from moments no one else sees. A silly joke on a dark night. A hand held without explanation. A ritual created for no other reason than to say, "I see you." The first lesson is about showing up. Sandra did not have the right words when she found Keanu grieving on that bus. She did not have solutions or answers or wisdom to offer. She simply had her presence. And sometimes, presence is enough. Sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do for another person is to sit with them in their pain without trying to fix it. The second lesson is about the courage to be ridiculous. The handshake started as a joke, a spontaneous burst of silliness in a moment of darkness. And it worked precisely because it was silly. It gave Keanu permission to laugh when laughter seemed impossible. It reminded both of them that life can hold absurdity and grief at the same time, and that embracing the absurdity does not diminish the grief. The third lesson is about protection and vulnerability. For 30 years, Keanu and Sandra guarded their secret carefully. They understood that some things are too precious to expose to a world that often consumes rather than cherishes. But they also learned when to open their hands and share what they had protected. True wisdom lies in knowing the difference between guarding and hoarding, between protecting something sacred and hiding something that could help others. The fourth lesson is about the ripple effects of kindness. Michael Chen almost destroyed something beautiful, but in the end, they chose a different path. That choice was not born from guilt or fear, but from remembering who they had wanted to become. Keanu and Sandra's friendship, without them ever knowing it, reminded a bitter stranger that kindness matters more than currency. We never know how our choices will affect the people watching from the shadows. The fifth and perhaps most important lesson is about creating your own rituals. The specific movements of Keanu and Sandra's handshake are not important. What matters is the intention behind them. Every person listening to this story has the power to create something similar with someone they love. A phrase that only two people understand. A gesture that carries private meaning. A ritual that says, in whatever language feels right, you are not alone and you never will be. Keanu Reeves has spent his life demonstrating that fame does not require cruelty, that success does not demand selfishness, that it is possible to move through the world with gentleness and still accomplish remarkable things. Sandra Bullock has shown us that strength and vulnerability can coexist, that asking for help is not weakness, that true friendship is worth more than any career achievement. Together, they have given us something precious. Not just a story about a secret handshake, but a reminder of what matters most in this brief and beautiful life we share. Connection, presence, the willingness to look foolish for love, the courage to show up even when we do not know how to help. So find your person, create your ritual, let it be silly, let it be sacred. Let it be something that no one else in the world understands except the two of you. And when life gets hard, when the darkness threatens to overwhelm, perform your secret handshake and remember that you are not alone. That is the gift Keanu and Sandra gave each other on a fake bus 30 years ago. And now, through sharing their story, it is a gift they have given to all of us. Some things are too sacred to sell, but some things are too important not to share.